Hello, everyone. It is Monday night, and tonight I get to introduce you to my friend, Gabrielle Meyer, and she has 25 books out, but we're going to talk about her brand new one, which is so much fun. I am about halfway through it, and I have to tell you, I may not get any sleep tonight because it's hit the point where I just have to know what happens. So when the day comes, releases this month. And what's really fun about it is it's kind of a split time, but it's with the same heroine. And so, Gabrielle, I just want to start this off by what genre would you call this?
That's a tough question. A lot of people are talking about that. I would say it's a subgenre of time travel, but also dual time novels. I can just give a really brief synopsis for everyone. So here's the cover. When the Day Comes, it is about Libby, and she is born with a gift. She lives in 1774 Colonial Williamsburg. And when she goes to sleep there, she wakes up in 1914 New York City. When she goes to sleep in New York, she wakes up in Williamsburg again, back and forth every day, with no time passing while she's away. And on her 21st birthday, she has to choose which of those lives she wants to keep and which one she will forfeit. So I call it time crossing. It's not your typical time travel novel, which would be more like Outlander or the Waters of Time series by Jodi Hedlund, where you have a character who's living in their modern world, and somehow they get pushed through a portal of time, whether it's through rocks or drinking holy water, like in Jodi's stories, and then they end up in a different time. And their goal is to get back to their modern life. And of course, a lot of things happen to cause them to not want to go back, or to maybe have this conundrum, which life do I want to choose? So mine is not like that in the fact that she actually is born into two different lives, but then has to choose between those two. So time crossing is the new subgenre I'm creating, I guess.
Well, and that was what just really captivated me with this book and this idea. Because number one, the cover's gorgeous. And I'm like, oh, there's these two women on it. And then as I read the back cover, I was like, wait, it's not two women, it's one. And I love Lisa Thunbergren's time travel book, where it's set in Siena, Italy, back in the Middle Ages. It's something my daughters and I have bonded over because it's so much fun. But like you said, this one's different because it's the same woman, and the fact that she's basically living two lives. So she lives every day two times. Once, it's not even like she's jumping back and forth in her own timeline. So how did you come up with the complexities of these ideas? Because it's very different from anything that I've seen before.
Well, I remember the day that I was thinking about it, I was actually thinking about Outlander because I've watched that series, and I was just kind of thinking about that idea of this time travel, and it just kind of hit me like, well, what if both of her lives were her normal life? What if she had an equal investment in both of them? And so then I was kind of playing around with that idea, and I just thought, well, what if she went to sleep? And that was how she made the time crossing. So she has two physical bodies, they're identical, but she has one conscious mind that goes back and forth between them. So her physical bodies are 20 years old, but her mind has the experience of a 40-year-old. So she's a little bit more mature. She's not your typical new adult. And so when that kind of hit me, that struck me, that idea, my mind just went wild with the possibilities. I had just recently been to Colonial Williamsburg, had visited there, and I loved it. It was like my home away from home. And we had been watching Hamilton all summer long. My daughter was singing the songs. So that really, I knew right away that I wanted one of the timelines to be colonial America. But then the second one was a little bit more challenging. I wanted it to be something that would have a contrast. And so when I thought about the Gilded Age, which I'm very familiar with that time, I've done a lot of research. I thought about like Downton Abbey, and Lady Grantham, if you're familiar with the series, she's actually an American heiress. And I did a little bit of research and I found out that these were called American dollar princesses. They were actually women who were part of the nouveau rich, and they wanted to enter into that like old money society that Mrs. Astor reigned over in New York. But it was hard for this new rich to get into. And so what a lot of these families did is they took their daughters, gave them a substantial dowry, and brought them to England and married them into the aristocracy so that they would gain a titled daughter, and then that elevated them in New York society. So I thought, in the first one, Libby and her family are fighting the English, and they want to remove themselves from the aristocracy and from all of that. And in her other timeline, her mother is trying to marry her back into the English aristocracy. There was over sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's a great twist. And it was such an interesting dichotomy to put them next to each other and see the differences and yet the similarities that are underlying both of those time periods when it comes to what do we do with the royalty and how do we see ourselves, and the fact that she's trying to be involved in the suffragette movement in one life, and then she's right at the forefront of the American Revolution in the other. And Nina said, yeah, Winston Churchill's mom was American. Yes. And she even shows up kind of in the book. Yep. And so there definitely was this move, and it's so foreign to me in some ways to be like, oh, I'll just in a sense sell my daughter to gain a title.
Yeah, they actually eventually looked at it as a form of slavery for a lot of these women because it wasn't a choice for them. There was over 200 women, American women, who were married into the English aristocracy. They brought with them over $1 billion in currency into the English economy, which in today's money has the buying power of $34 billion. Princess Diana's grandmother was actually a dollar princess. So it was a fascinating history for me to learn. And so I had so much fun incorporating it into the book.
Yeah, I loved it because I'd heard of them before, but I do think it's one of those kind of hidden stories. And it's, we all talk about, we don't really have American royalty, but people went and found them and bought them basically. So Diana read the book and loved it. And Karen is excited about all the buzz and wants to read it. But Diana wants to know, was it hard to write in the two time eras?
Yes. So as opposed to like a dual time story where you have two protagonists in two different eras who are, different, I had the same woman with all of the same character qualities, but she lives in two very, very different cultures. And so I needed to have a strong woman who could stand up for herself in both, but also fit within the cultures of her time. So one of the challenges then was to try to keep her consistent. But like all of us, I have a different relationship with my mom as I would with my husband, as I would with my daughter. And so Libby has two very different mothers. The one in 1774 knows she's a time crosser because the one in 1774 was also a time crosser, but the one in 1914 does not know she's a time crosser. And her mothers are like on two ends of a spectrum, and their relationship with Libby is completely different. So Libby, even though she's the same person, she responds differently to each of her lives and the expectations in her life. So it was a challenge, but it was really fun. Every day I sat down and I was in a different time. So it was kind of like writing two books, but combined. And I'm a linear writer. So I like write one chapter after the other. Some people have asked, did I write one time period and then the other one separate? But I didn't, because I wanted that cohesion for Libby. So she might wake up in 1914 and think about something that happened to her the day before in 1774, as we all do when we wake up and think about something that happened the day before. So yeah, that's a great question.
Well, and that's actually where I was going to go next is, did you write it all at one time, or, write it sequentially, or did you write one and then the other? Because I found with split time novels, everybody does it a little differently. And some like to do it like you did, where it's still that very sequential, and others write it separately and then weave it together. And so I always think it's interesting because it's such an individual choice. Now you're going to love this, because Emily and Hannah both said that your book that this book we're talking about is one of their top reads of 2022.
Yay, thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
And
Yeah.
Emily wants to know also, did you watch the American Dollar Princesses series on Hulu?
I did not. No. I actually, so one of the documentaries I watched, maybe it was that one. I don't know. It was hosted by Elizabeth McGovern, if that's the same one, where it's kind of like a documentary, but they had the characters. So like Winston Churchill's mother, they had a woman portray her and they showed bits and pieces of her life kind of in a narrative form. But so if that's the one that was on Hulu, yes, I watched it. I don't remember what it was called, but it was really interesting because we have a little neighbor girl and she came over and she's like 10 and she was staring at the TV the whole time I was watching one episode, and she went home and told her mom, I don't know what she's watching over there, but it looked interesting. Like,
well, Emily says that's the right one.
Okay, yes.
And that the time crossing was done really well. And I think that that's a challenge, but like you said, when you've got this character who's waking up in one time period, she's going to think about what was happening the day before. And then as she goes to bed, wondering what she's going to find next. And so it makes a lot of sense that you would kind of approach it in that way. But you write on average 6 books a year, which makes me tired because the most I've written in a year, I think, was 4, maybe 5, and that's a lot. So you've got a way that you do it called fast drafting. What does that look like?
I actually do teach a class on it. It's how to write a book in 3 months, but I only say that because it seems less daunting to people than when I say how to write it in 4 weeks. I have a whole process, and when I sit down, I've thought about my story for a little while. I've kind of picked it apart. Maybe I've shared it with some other writers or my husband or my daughter, somebody. And then I sit down and I interview my characters, try to figure out who they are and what they want and all of that. And then I have a spreadsheet. I'm a spreadsheet girl. And I actually plot all of the big pieces of the story. And then I kind of add in each scene, what needs to happen to get my character from one place to the next. And then I do a synopsis based off of my spreadsheet. And then I sit down. By the time I've actually sat down to write, I've been working on the story for about 2 or 3 weeks. I might have 10,000 words written in my synopsis and in all of my notes and all of that. And then when I sit down to finally write, that's when I write really fast. I usually do about a chapter a day. And so for like when the day comes, I want to say it's like 30 chapters, something like that. So really it only takes me 30 writing days. This book I wrote when I had COVID. I had a very light case of COVID, thankfully. And so I wrote it in 4 weeks, the first draft of it, which was really fast for a big book, but it was, for me, it's doable.
Yeah. But I keep thinking like the first book I wrote, Canteen Dreams, I had done the chapter by chapter synopsis and I wrote it in 2 weeks, but that was 50,000 words. Mm-hmm. So, if you double that, you get to, it's about 30 writing days. And I think you and I are both probably pretty fast writers because I can write 2,000 words a chapter in about an hour and a half, 2 hours when I'm focused and when I don't have to do research. Now, if you have to do research, then all bets are off. And then the challenge is not getting lost in the research trails. So how do you know how not to get lost?
That, I was one time talking to a friend about research because she also asked me kind of the same question. How do you know enough research is enough? Like, how do you know that you've got enough where you can sit down and start writing? And I tell her when I feel full, if that makes sense. Yeah. Like, okay, I've got a general idea of what the era felt like, looked like. I've read enough books. I've watched enough documentaries, and then I'll start writing. And if something comes up, I'll pin it and just, like I need to do a little bit of research to make sure that that fits. There are times when I do enjoy research just as much as writing. And so it can get dangerous once in a while. So I usually, for me, when I'm actually writing, when I'm not writing it yet, I will just let myself go because I sometimes find the little cool nuggets that you can put into the story. When I'm actually in writing mode and have to look up some little question I have, I will only research until I find that question. if it's taking me a little bit longer than I feel like it should, then I will just kind of scrap it and choose to go in a different direction. I one time heard somebody say that they were trying to find this correct wine that they wanted to put into a book. And so they were trying to look up the grapes and the year and all of this, and they couldn't find what they needed. So they just put wine, like she just drank the wine. And that's kind of how I look at historical research. Sometimes I just have to call it, she ate chicken instead of chicken fricassee like she has in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that that's one of those balancing acts we have to do as writers, because if we're writing historical, usually it's because we really are interested in that time period. And so I've always said, if I start going in a circle where everything I'm reading comes to the same conclusion, then I have to stop. And I'm getting ready to write 2 World War II novellas this summer, like starting tomorrow. And so I'm already bracing myself for, I'm going to want to go down all the rabbit trails and I have to stay focused. And then I can do rabbit trails later when I'm looking for that next idea. But I also love the idea of penning it, because I think sometimes we can let the idea of getting all the research perfect at the very beginning stop us from actually getting the writing done. And so throw a comment in there and say, you need to go find this detail. Or the other thing I love to do is I will throw footnotes in with links to my research. So it's all right there for my editor, so that I kind of try and preempt the questions of, well, how do you really know this is how it was done? And just kind of throw that in there and leave it. And then all my research is easy to find, tied with the content. And then of course it'll get stripped out because nobody wants to read a novel with footnotes. But you know, little things like that can really help streamline and keep us focused on the writing when we need to write. So I've got a couple of questions here that I want to make sure I come back to. Some people want to know, do you teach online writing classes?
I have not actually. I've done several in person. I've done a few conferences, and we have our local Minnesota NICE ACFW. I usually teach there once a year, but I have not done any online yet.
So I think we need to get you on the schedule for an ACFW webinar on the fast drafting. I think that would be great.
I would enjoy that.
Yeah, I'm going to make a note on that, because you would be great for that. And then Karen wants to know, is this the first book that you've written outside of Love Inspired?
So actually, when I first started to write, I was writing long historical. They're called trade length historical. So I had written, actually, this is the 7th long historical that I wrote for Bethany House or other trade length publishers to consider. And for the first 6 of them, I wasn't finding a publishing house. And so my agent and I kind of talked, and because writing is my career, it's what I want to do full time, we started to talk about other options. And Love Inspired had a really cool opportunity that they presented to me. And so I started writing for Love Inspired. But I also, my first books were through Barber. I have several novella collections. They're all historical. I think I have 8 with them. And so this is my first full-length historical published, but I do have the historical novellas. I actually have some historical Love-inspired books as well. I have 4 with them. So yes and no. This is my first long historical, but I have some other ones that I've written.
And then you've also written cozy mysteries with Guidepost.
Yes.
And so you're another one of those, very flexible, right, all over the place, which is great. Okay, so more people popping in and talking about how excited they are about this book and just the great job you did with creating the world and all the characterization and everything. But this is your 25th book, but you're first with Bethany. But you were just telling me that Bethany has been like the dream publisher. So what has it been like to get to write with them?
So yeah, when I was 10 years old, my aunt handed me my first my Love Comes Softly book. And I turned it over and I saw the Bethany House logo and it said St. Paul, Minnesota under it. And I'm from Minnesota and I thought, well, that would be cool. I want to write for them someday. And so fast forward to, I want to say I was in my early 30s and I started to write to pursue publication, and it was harder than I thought it would be. It wasn't like, I'm going to write this book and Bethany House is going to grab it. So it's been amazing. I've been writing now for 10 years. I started my journey to publication 10 years ago. And so to finally be able to hold this in my hands, I did cry. It was quite an emotional moment for me. But I love it. I love working for them. I mean, I love working for everybody that I write for. I have some amazing editors in every single house that I've written for. But it's a lot of fun to be able to, pop into the offices down in St. Paul. And I've gotten to know a lot of the staff members there, and it's a great team to work with. They're amazing.
That's awesome. Well, and they've created just an amazing cover for this book. And they do a wonderful job on their team with covers in general. But since this is your first trade length novel after writing with novellas, which are normally 25 to 30,000 words, or 55,000 words for Love Inspired, 65 for Guideposts, what's the main difference when you're now writing the trade length, which is instead of 200 pages, it's 350 or 400? So what was the biggest adjustment or freedom that you got from being able to write a trade length novel?
I would definitely say the biggest freedom is just being able to add a lot more nuance to the story, a lot more characterization, digging deeper into themes and maybe some subplots. There's also, so this book deals with some tougher subjects, as I'm sure you've already come across if you're 45% of the way through. And writing in a novella, you just can't dig that deep. There's just not enough word count. And then of course, Love Inspired, it has a very specific brand. It's very sweet romance, even though you can get into some deeper subjects there. Just being able to have the freedom to tell the story how it needs to come out has been amazing. And even like the second book that I wrote for this series, I handed it into my editor, and it should be about 100,000 words, and I came out to 115. And I emailed her as I saw this, kind of looming. I thought, oh, I'm not going to make it in 100,000. And I emailed her, and she's like, you know what, tell the story how it needs to be told, and then if we need to cut, we'll cut. And so she just got back with edits, and there are very few cuts need to be made. But that having that freedom to just be like, hey, I need 15 extra thousand, and I was able to get it. So
yeah. And that's one of the great things, because these other publishers are much more, it has to be a certain number of pages and it can't go over that. And
right.
So to be able to go, no, this is actually what the story needs, or to be able to work with editors who you can say, hey, this baby's a little fat and sassy, but I can't see what needs to come out. And
right.
That's the beauty of having that relationship where you can, at a certain point, just turn it over and be like, hey, I need your help. And as an editor, they can come in and help make it a better story. So is there anything in this book that you were like, man, when the day comes, it has to have all of this, and an editor went, actually, no, this needs to come out, but this needs to go in?
I don't know what it is about this story. When I wrote it, and even as fast as I wrote it, I sent it to my editor, and there wasn't really a lot that she, there was, I'm trying to think if there was anything specific. Nothing is jumping out. She'd probably be like, I gave you a list. We had a list. But, my mind is actually kind of on book 2 right now, and all of the things that she suggested we change there. But no, I feel like this story just kind of told itself. And I feel like because it did, that Libby is very organic. She, there's a lot of her that's from me, and a lot like the character, her mama in 1774, there's a lot of me in her, but there's also my mom in her. So it was beautiful to write that story. I just have loved writing it and being a part of, I don't say this lightly, the story that God told through me. It's beautiful. And he does that through all of us. I think that that's one of the reasons he calls us to be writers, is to tell the stories through us if we're willing to get out of the way. Because sometimes I'm like, no, I want it to go this way, and it kind of goes in its own direction. So
I love it when that happens, because basically it's like magic when you hit those moments where you're like, you're just writing and it's flowing and you're in such a good partnership with God on what the story is supposed to be. And it's just wonderful and such a great feeling, because there are other books where you're beating your head against a wall the
Right.
entire time
Yes.
you're writing it. And so it's great when you have those where they just flow. So Emily wanted to know, do you get to have input on what your covers look like? Because we're all agreeing, and you'll see in the comments later, Bethany House knocked it out of the park with this one.
Good, yeah. So they send me a questionnaire, and that I fill it out and give them all of the pertinent information about the characters, and then kind of my vision for the cover. And that's a hard one because I'm not visually artistic. I love to create art with words, but not necessarily with pictures and painting. And so I was really clueless. You know, I gave them some covers that I loved that had that kind of just a sense of place and a feeling about them. And so when I got this cover, I was shocked. I had no idea that this is what they would do. And I love it. It's perfect. I do have to say that the first cover option they gave me did not quite look like this. They had this Libby in 1774. She was a little bit more formal looking. She had earrings and she did not have the fichu here. And then the Libby in 1914, her clothing was a little bit wrong. They had about 10 years earlier than what's depicted in the book. And there was also like a white diamond in the center. And so there was a few things that right away jumped out at me. And so Bethany House was amazing to work with. You know, they took out the diamond, they changed the font a little bit, they added her fichu, took out the earrings, and then they completely redid her on this side. So it's amazing what they can do. Like, it's shocking actually, when, you know, as opposed to, you know, with the Photoshop or whatever program it is that they do, how they can add those things and take them out. But yeah,
it's amazing. It's gorgeous, and it captures her experience in the way that it's just this constant revolution of days and things. So we've got 3 minutes and we've got 2 questions. So these are going to be fast.
Okay.
So would you ever do a book set in gangster era St. Paul?
Maybe.
Okay.
Very familiar with it. So yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to it, but I haven't had a story idea pop out yet.
And then the other one is, do you have any advice for aspiring writers? So what would be the #1 piece of advice you would give to someone who wants to become a writer?
My best advice to anybody is to keep writing. So if you finish one story, lay it aside and keep working on the next story, because I see a lot of aspiring authors who stay on the same story for years and years and years. And my best advice is to put that aside, even though it's your baby, and move on to the next story, because you have so much to learn from every single book you write. I'm still learning after 25 books. Every book is a new journey. So keep writing.
Yeah, that's great advice. And Colleen Coble, who was on a couple of weeks ago, she always says she spent too much time on that first book. It did get published, but she could have been published faster. She kept writing instead of just staying focused on that first story. So thank you so much for joining me tonight. This was so much fun, Gabrielle.
I had a lot of fun. Thank you. I was going to say this is book 1 in a 3-book series. So next year, book 2 will come out, and I hope that everybody enjoys book 1 and wants to read book 2.
I know I do. So make sure you go out and add When the Day Comes to your shopping cart, or go and get it from your local bookstore, because it is really, it's intriguing and it's a really fun read, even as it deals with some deep issues. But it's very, very enjoyable. And I guarantee you'll get to a point where you won't want to put it down. So definitely grab When the Day Comes by Gabrielle Meyers. Thanks so much.
Thank you.